as we spoke about yesterday, they had introduced a specific format for how the debate was going to go, including silencing of mics, a strict time constraint for each candidate to speak. But we also spoke about the fact that this was going to be a debate where people were going to focus primarily on personality and the physical presence of these candidates over some of the policy measures that they were going to be talking about. What is your assessment of what we got from this presidential debate just over an hour ago?
Yeah, a test of endurance for both candidates, both for former President Trump and for President Biden. Remember, the debate circumstances really tried to address some of the issues you've seen in past debates, really address interrupting, which was, of course, a feature of the 2020 debate by President Trump and President Biden as well. You saw moments of that as well, but CNN really decided to use muted microphones as a way of tackling that. They also talked about both candidates having to stand at their podiums for 90 minutes, no time for debate or consulting with their debate teams and their campaign teams. It also only included 2 commercial breaks and only 1 minute, about 1 minute, sometimes 2-minute answers, but mostly about 60 seconds for them to respond to criticisms from each other. Interruptions, follow-up questions, even real-time fact-checking were all put into pushed aside, I should say, for this certain debate. Again, really to emphasize the fact that these are 2 candidates that need to be engaging in a civil discourse. At least that was the goal from CNN's perspective. When in terms of the actual result, it seems like Joe Biden has been viewed as not doing so well. The questions of his health only emphasized after he stumbled several times, had kind of a raspy voice as well. Coming out of the debate, the Democratic Party certainly concerned.
Definitely playing into concerns over his age there. In terms of the topics that were discussed, it was wide-ranging. They had moments to talk about immigration, big topic in the U.S., obviously abortion, but also the state of the economy, because many Americans have been concerned about high levels of inflation, cost of living. And I do wonder if we gleaned anything new from an economic perspective looking ahead, and whether they also addressed that big question of what to do with the U.S. fiscal deficits.
Well, Joumanna, it's the very first thing on the new president's docket, regardless of who enters the Oval Office in January of 2025. So the question is, how do they actually close that gap? 2 candidates, 2 completely different policy approaches. Let me just walk you through some of what they actually talked about in terms of their approach. I'll start with President Biden, specifically talking about tax hikes on the wealthy, saying if you make over $400,000, he expects you to have to pay even more on their tax. And that's something that's going to help fund some of the deficit. He's also talking about more long-term plans, even more chip investment, even more tackling on drug pricing, things that he says are going to add billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of benefit when it comes to closing that gap. That is President Biden's economic agenda, or parts of it at least. President Trump taking a little bit of a different approach. He's talking about tax cuts and really emphasizing that as a way to get multiple corporations, like Apple, for example, is one that he named, in terms of repatriating some of the money that is being held abroad. Remember, this was a kind of pillar of his former policy as well. He's talking about investing in oil and gas. He's talking about potentially pulling out of NATO and pulling back on the spending there. And of course, the big one, tariffs, in terms of helping funding that deficit.